You don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to it be so humming. You don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord, yeah, yeah.
Okay, hey, thanks for coming back to listen to us again. My name's David Fuquay, and this podcast is New South Christians. And man, have we got a winner today. We have got Gabby Bass, originally from Burbank, California. I actually had her as in my economics class. You took macro and micro, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so she's been condemned 2 times now. And she's agreed to go on the podcast, and I've been sitting here shooting the breeze with her, and she's exactly what we're looking for out of this podcast. Different perspective, different points of view. So we're going to go ahead and let Gabby just introduce herself. Anything you might want to share?
Well,
How long you been here, came from California, et cetera?
yeah, so like you said, I'm originally from California. I moved here 4.5 years ago, and it was in the middle of high school, so that was, a culture shock. But it was cool. It was cool. And I have a twin sister, fraternal twin. Love her a lot. So, yeah. Thanks for having me here today.
Well, good. I'm glad you've agreed to go on. All right. Well, so we're going to start off. Obviously, we call it New South Christians. So we're going to start off talking about different religious issues or religion or et cetera. There are no right or wrong answers. It's just your perspective, obviously representing Generation Z, the either good or evil empire, depending on your point of view, particularly as far as churches go. So I'm just going to throw out some statistics and stuff. Just tell me what you think or how would you react to it. Like, for example, before we went on, I was refreshing my research last night, and one of the articles talked about your generation was basically killing religion. You think that's too extreme? I mean, where would somebody come up with that? I mean, we know that as far as a religious group, the nuns, they call them, people that, don't identify with any particular religious group or attend church, is the largest group in your generation. But some of the other statistics are like, say, you're less likely to read the Bible, less likely to pray at dinner, with a family. But then I found some other research that says the chances of you eating together as a family are slim and none. So when you just hear that right off, kind of like killing religion, what do you think?
I mean, I can see some truth in that. I know that recently we've all had a lot of distractions in our lives, social media, stresses, with anxiety, depression. There's a lot of things that could plague on our minds that can keep us from the Lord. And yeah, so I can see that. And like you said, a lot of people, like a good group of us, are agnostic and don't really believe in God, but they believe that there's a creator. They just don't believe in God specifically, and maybe they don't go out of their way to open up their Bibles and pray like they should. So I can see that. And also, like you mentioned, that a lot of families don't always have dinner together, which I think also has a lot of truth to that as well. I think.
Well, and they said like 1 in 4, come from single parent head of households. So, you can understand if there's only one person earning a paycheck, obviously they're probably at work as opposed to eating dinner with you. So the idea of, I thought, this is my personal opinion, using that statistic against you, I didn't think was fair.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, it's really hard. Like, I'm just going to mention the economy briefly, because obviously with inflation and how difficult it is, people are living paycheck to paycheck these days, even parents that, yeah. So it's just hard to really find time for families to come together and have dinner together like it would normally be. So I think some family dynamics aren't the same as they once maybe were.
Well, they also talk about that you're a lonely generation. I find that kind of interesting. Of course, I see you in a classroom situation, so I guess you could mask loneliness for an hour and 25 hour and 30 minutes. But do you think your generation's the lonely generation?
Well, I guess I also see some truth in that, because I know we have social media, and I think it has to do with the fact that people don't really go out of their way to really get to know people anymore. That's what I've been hearing a lot, that no one really goes out of their way to get to know someone and to ask more than just, oh, how was your day today? What'd you do? Beyond that, I don't think that's usually what I've heard from people. They're like, oh yeah, no one really asks people more than just the common,
kind of surface stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
the common niceties. Yeah.
Well, something else I wanted you to comment on, and I'm not trying to bash the church, but when you start looking at, for example, some of the statistics I came across the other night, they were talking about, this was a predominantly white male Christian society, for 240 years or something. Well, your generation is much more, racially diverse, interracial dating, et cetera. So obviously that's changed dramatically. But then when you start looking at the church, that the membership in church of young people, whether it be from the liberal political spectrum or conservative, is like in free fall. And so it's like, not only has it changed racial makeup, but it's also changed attendance makeup. And then you have these different attitudes. And then a lot of the research I found said you don't trust the church, you don't trust the pastor. And that when you look at the pastor, you're not looking at somebody who just talks to you about God, but not imitate God, but reflect God in you. In other words, live it, be authentic. But if you're just going to talk to me about God, you're going to lose a big portion of the rest of them. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's true?
Obviously you can imagine that we all sin, we're all human. So I feel like it's kind of, harsh judgment to like say that, that, you don't trust the preacher and what they say, because obviously they're preaching from the word, and, obviously they're not going to add on a bunch of other interpretations. I feel like they allow people to come to their own conclusions, and maybe they'll include some things that we might have overlooked, but I don't think necessarily they're not trustworthy. I feel like, if they've dedicated themselves to the Lord, I mean, obviously we've all made mistakes, and if we've repented, of course, I mean, we're allowed to have some forgiveness in ourselves and hopefully by other people, so that's kind of how I see it.
Well, what do you think the number one reason people in your generation don't go to church? Because, I mean, not only do you have the agnostic thing going on over here, you've got the people that casually, maybe once a month, bounce in and out. So why do you think we've turned, like, your grandmother lives around here, right?
Yeah.
Is she one of those good traditional conservatives?
Yes.
Okay, so you arrive. I mean, are you on the evil path? Are you like my sister lives in Burbank. We've talked about this. So is she corrupted by that California liberal? And then you got transplanted here. So you are the New South Christian we're talking about. So how did the transition work? Does your grandmother view you as, she's come home now, we can get the right values in her? I mean, maybe that's a little too personal. But.
Well, actually, you're pretty spot on with that. My grandma, actually, she's definitely very conservative, and she actually will have my mom make sure that we go to the ballot to go, put in our ballots and everything, and she makes sure she circles which ones that we vote for. Yeah, so she makes sure.
She scans your votes. Oh my God.
Like she makes sure, she's like, okay, pick this one. I highlighted this one. Yeah, and we're just like, okay, yes, Grandma.
It's good to have your own free will and your own vote, right?
Yeah. So I normally, I don't usually always talk about politics to her, and if she does, she's usually the one that's talking, and I usually just nod my head like, yes, Grandma. Yeah.
I'm sorry to laugh, but you just described my mom and dad to the T. Of course, I went off the rails a long time ago to my mom. We still struggle. I love her, but we still struggle. If I'm down at her house and some certain shows are on, I won't mention, and politics comes up, it just isn't going to go well. So I've tried to subdue my opinion, but I just can't do it. I just can't. So I make sure to be close to home so I can leave rapidly. Well, since you mentioned politics, I gotta deviate for a minute from what I was gonna do. I also read a cool thing last night that in the last election, obviously President Trump at the time, very controversial figure running against, President Biden now, and of course all the controversy that goes with that. They were talking about the Generation Z, first time up for many of you voting, that you came out in huge numbers. I mean, massive turnout. But that the description of a typical Gen Z that came out to vote in this last presidential election is a 20-year-old voting Democrat. But if you took that same Gen Z that was, or the same Republican, they're represented by an 80-year-old white person. So I guess maybe I didn't do that as well. So the younger Gen Z is voting blue, Democratic, more liberal, social issues, et cetera. views the Republican Party as these old white guys that are out of touch. So how do you react to that? Do you think there's some truth to that? I mean, your grandmother's looking over you, make sure you do the right vote. So
I can see truth to that. I definitely can see how the younger generations, I know that, they can be a lot more inclusive and wanting to seek social changes, and they care a lot about people and how, feelings and all that. And I can see how the older generation, they mainly care about the economy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I feel like with conservative and Democrat, it's kind of like almost like sectioned off into two, where it's like conservatives care about the economy and then Democrats care about like the people and social change. So it's really interesting how it's split up like that. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, what about as far as social issues? Your generation's always painted as, care about the environment, care about things. I think you're wanting to go into...
Yeah, environmental science.
Yeah, so you're the perfect person to ask. Are the rest of us out of touch? I mean, are those the issues that your generation is really into? I mean, I think of the George Floyd social justice issues, but strictly environmental issues too.
So yeah, actually, I think it's an important note to bring up that I do think that the environment is a really important thing that we should be focusing on. But at the same time, I do also acknowledge that there's a lot of problems with our economy right now, and I feel like it's hard for all of us to come together and work on this problem when we're so focused on getting by and living paycheck to paycheck, like I said. So I think that in order for us to even be able to focus on a big issue like that, when there's so many different aspects of it, I think we'd have to fix the economic issues first before we can really tackle that.
Well, but it's funny you should say that, because some of the other statistics that come out say that your generation doesn't feel very optimistic about the future, and they don't think things are going to get any better, and they don't trust people, and they particularly don't trust people in Washington politically. So, I mean, is that kind of working crosshair? Because you're talking about serious environmental issues that need to be tackled, but at the same time, we're asking in surveys, your generation, how you feel about the future? Not good. Things are looking bad, and I don't trust people. I mean, can you put those two together and have any hope for the future, or do you feel optimistic? I mean, you're talking about going to UT Chattanooga after you move on from here. You want to do environmental science. You obviously care about the future, but then you run into this wall of do you find pessimism in your group? Is that true?
Yeah, actually, I do. I try and think positive as much as I can, because the whole point of me going into environmental science is because I'm doing something I'm passionate about. I want to make a difference. I want to help preserve future generations, because I'll be honest, the future does look a little bit bleak at this point in time. Looking ahead, I'm just like, okay, so our economy is in shambles, and where we are with the environment, no one can really even agree. And some people don't even think climate change is still real.
Right.
So it's just, we're not really at a good place. And I know that there was a goal where it's 2 degrees Celsius was the most that we wanted to have increased over by 2050 or 21, I think it was 2100. And we're already over halfway past that. So it's just, we're not anywhere. We'd have to really rein it together right now. But I don't see that really happening unless we can really come together, which it's a little difficult.
So are you going to have to just wait till my generation gets out of the way to really tackle it, or will it be too late then?
I mean, no, not necessarily. I mean, I'm hoping that even older generations can see past that, you can't eat money. Right. So, at the end of the day.
That's a very good quote. I like that.
There's a lot of different, aspects of environment. It's not just, ecosystems. It's also about agriculture and our food and survival. There's a lot of different aspects that people might overlook and take for granted. We take for granted that we have food on our plates, and that there's many countries out there that don't have that access or access to clean water. There's just so many different issues that we don't see because, in the United States, it's the greatest nation on earth, so we just don't see all these things. But when it really comes down to it, I feel like we're not going to be able to act until it's too late.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's do one more real depressing thing, and then we'll move on from there. One of the things that really has upset me doing the research for this has been these statistics, these things that have to do with, was that 42% of you supposedly battle depression, hopelessness. You're also called the lonely generation. You're 3 times likely to consider suicide. 1 out of 2 of you know someone battling depression. And the research that just came out this morning on NPR on the way I was driving in here said a recent study looked over a 10-year period that depression among your generation doubled. And we can't blame everything on the pandemic, but that's what a lot of people do. And that 1 in 5 of you know someone who has died from suicide, not attempted suicide, but actually died. And so I don't know, when I read that, it's very depressing. I mean, it's depressing for me because I've got you in class. So I mean,
Yeah.
do you want to react to that? I mean, do you think all that's true?
I mean, yeah, I do. I do believe that's true. I do know a lot of people that suffer with anxiety and depression. It's a pretty common thing now. I personally don't have issues with that, but at the same, I mean, I do have a lot of stress and anxiety, so I can say that. But it's just, yeah, it is pretty sad, and it makes you think, wow, okay, well, this is the future. This is our future. Like, this is what our future is going to look like. These are the people that are going to be, you know, the doctors and the lawyers and everyone that has those big positions, and it's just, if we're not all mentally there, you know,
Sure.
I don't know what that's going to look like
So
anymore.
how would you tackle this problem? I mean, this is your generation. I mean, coming from your perspective, what are we doing wrong? Like, you know, Vol State, what are we doing wrong? What are the churches doing wrong? Because we're talking about New South Christians. I mean, are the churches just focusing on, you know, heaven and hell and traditional issues? Or because if this is the majority of you, you don't walk in that door and all of a sudden these statistics go away. So what's the church doing wrong? Or are they even talking about this? I don't know.
I feel like the main thing, I feel like maybe this generation mainly just feels misunderstood. Like
Okay.
I feel like a lot of people in my generation just think that from what they've heard of like older people at the same time, that they think that we're incompetent, lazy, and that we don't have any work ethic, you know, like that we've changed, like we're different than what, you know, how they were, and that, you know,
Right.
we don't, like we're so attached to our phones. And, you know, when you hear things like comments like that, it almost makes you feel like, okay, well, they don't understand what I'm going through. They don't really care.
Okay.
And they might see like, you know, churches and how they're conducted today with, you know, the normal, like, you know, gospel music and like maybe and like all the service, and maybe they just feel like it's not as inclusive and that they don't feel
Right.
very welcome there. I don't really know exactly, but that's kind of what I would maybe think if that's how.
Well, what would
they're
you do
feeling.
if I made this just popped in my head? If I made you a minister, like we both live over in Robertson County, and I don't know, the Church of the Bass, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, New Bass Christian Outreach Church, whatever. You know, what would you do to get your generation to come in the door? Because I think everything you've been sharing, I've heard from a lot of other people I've had on this show. So it's obviously not some secret that only you and I know. I mean, it's obviously out there. What would you do? How would you get them in the church?
Well, I do think there are some good churches out there from what I've heard. Like,
Oh, yeah.
From California, like they have, you know, like they have like these bands sometimes that come up, and it's like really like engaging music, and like everyone's, you know, they make sure that everyone's like involved and that everyone's having a good time, and like
Sure.
it's not only just about, you know, reading the Bible, which is the main part. It's obviously the most important part, but also making sure that everyone, you know, is just having a good time and
But
wants
how
to
do you
come.
get them in the door? You got to get them in the door before you can play the music to them or read the word to them.
Right,
And
so-
everything I read is you're gonna have to do it a different way. Whatever way we're doing it, it's not happening.
Yeah, I think there has to be someone that gives that church an opportunity, and then pretty much from there, I feel like I know social media is a really good way for people to like
Yes.
bring up different places. So maybe if they, you know, included that on their, I don't know. I think nowadays it has to do a lot with advertising now, because a lot of people, like I said, are looking on social media. So I feel like the church might have to market itself a little more and advertise to get more public attention.
Right.
And usually that's not how it would be for churches. I mean, usually you go in there because you want to be there and like you want to just attend. But I think if you want to get more people nowadays, for younger people, you'd have to advertise. And
Okay, I got another question that just popped into my head. Okay, you remember how we talked about earlier that your generation, according to studies, a lot of you don't trust the pastor because you're looking for genuine, real. So you're the pastor. What qualities do you need to be that genuine person? So let's say I get you in the door, your generation, you're representing them. Once I've got you in the door, how do I get you to tear away the mistrust that you have in me? Or in this case, it's you.
yeah, I feel like it has a lot to do with being a good role model in a sense. So obviously on the outside, you can't just be, you know, acting one way on the inside and then being different on the outside. Like
So you got to walk it too.
Yeah, you also have to definitely walk it, and obviously getting involved with the community and the church community outside of the church, and like making sure that, you know, you set a good example, and that,
Right.
you know, yeah, just come off as trustworthy and like a good person. Like, yeah.
Well, let me ask you another. These are things just popping in my head, so if they seem random, they probably are. I was just sitting here thinking, because a lot of the research, you know, obviously the nuns are the largest group, so they don't even really believe in God necessarily, or maybe a supreme being, but can't define it or whatever. So, of the people you know that obviously maybe go to church, whatever, what do you think of God? What do you think God is?
That's something that I I know in the past I've struggled with, where I would go to church and I never I got baptized, and I never really felt like I quite deserved it, because at the time I didn't know for sure if I felt like I was saved, or if I felt like God was real. That's actually something I've really struggled with like accepting that God is real, and that, that he, created this earth, and his son died on the cross for our sins. And so that's something that I've struggled with. And I've tried getting better and getting more into the Bible, and really acknowledging that, the Bible is one of the oldest and probably most accurate works that there are out there, nonfiction works. So it's just, yeah. That's pretty much what I
Well,
think.
what do you think about this too? Did you hear about the Asbury University revival last spring?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it was a huge revival, kind of like the Jesus Revolution in California. Have you ever heard of the movie The Jesus Revolution? It's been out here recently. It's about the 1970 or late 69, early 70s Jesus Revolution that was out in Southern California, where you're from. And a lot of people believe, or at least according to what I've read, that your generation, that's more what they're going to be drawn to, that they're looking for an experience, a true connection with God and with the Spirit instead of the words. In other words, if you speak the words to me, okay, that's good, but I want to experience God. And they think those types of experiences. I went to the Asbury University revival. It was unbelievable. There were literally thousands and thousands of people that came to this college south of Lexington last spring from all over the world, felt drawn to come to what started as a praise and worship group playing at a typical early morning activity on this small Christian campus that exploded over the next 2-3 weeks into tens of thousands of people coming from all over the world. And when you went in, there was no preaching, there was no word. It was simply praise and worship. And I can tell you, for the hour, however long I was there, it was an experience. It wasn't a spoken word. It was a true spiritual experience. And I feel like I haven't been the same since.
Wow.
So you think they're right? That's what your generation's looking for? More of an experience from an authentic person who lives it, breathes it, and walks it, as opposed to somebody just reading words to me?
Yeah, 100%. I really think that's something that I feel like my generation would be looking for. I really think people want to form that connection with God, not only just reading the scripture and just being like, okay, like this is what he wants me to do. This is how he wants me to see things. More of actually not only that, but just actually forming a relationship. And I feel like that's honestly the most important part, in my opinion, with like forming that relationship with God, because he is just so forgiving and merciful, and he just wants to form a relationship with us. And that's really what we want too, because we really want to have that with him. And sometimes I used to just pray like, oh, like, please show yourself to me, like, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, at that time, I was honestly not even reaching out myself. I wasn't going out of my way to read his word. I was just like, oh yeah, prove yourself to me. Because I was still struggling with accepting that he was real. I was like, okay, just give me a sign, like how you've given people before. Like, just show me that you're real. And of course that never happened, because I wasn't going out of my way to try and get to know him. Like I was basically just, I was just asking for something that I probably didn't even deserve yet. So.
Well, I usually don't talk about my personal self on this so far. Anybody knows me knows I'm opinionated. You've had me in class, you know I am. But it's funny, what you just said reminded me of my own personal experience. When I was 18, my parents, we were pretty open-minded. I had very strong will, so getting me to go to church if I didn't want to go was a tough thing. But I agreed to go because it created harmony and all that. But I finally decided, if God is real, I need to know. So for 2 weeks, every night I prayed the same prayer, kind of like for a sign, let me know that I know. And I had decided that if I don't get an answer, I'm not going back anymore, because I've turned 18, the age of accountability. And it was weird. I was going to a full gospel church in Atlanta, and I won't get into a lot of the weird stuff, but bottom line is I ended up there on a Wednesday night sitting on the back row with a basketball because my mom wanted somebody to drive her. And I went to a full gospel church that believes in the full gospel, speaking in tongues, interpretation, etc. And I had my head down in respect, and they started praying. And all of a sudden, I realized the pastor is standing over me. He's got his hand on my head, and he says, and I just want to let you know. And he basically recited the prayer that I prayed every night for 2 weeks. And he said, I just want you to know that I am, and I am real. I never doubted from that moment forward. Maybe that was my sign, my experience. Now, was I a good Christian from that time forward? No. I've walked in sin more than I've done my fair share, if there is such a thing. But anyway, I understand what you're saying, and I think I'm not trying to be a pastor here and say that's what everybody should do, but I don't think God minds if you ask. Do you?
No, I don't think he
I
minds.
mean, I'm not saying you have to do a burning bush outside my window, but I don't think he minds if we ask. Did you expect to get an answer? That's kind of what I was curious about.
I mean, I was hoping to get one. I wasn't sure. I think.
But what if you expected? Would you have gotten it if you had expected it?
I feel like I might have, because I feel like
Okay.
maybe that would have been me giving more faith to him, like acknowledging that he probably is real and that I
Okay.
should be like getting more faith in his answer. But I feel like I wasn't. I was having trouble with faith. So I think that might have had.
We've all, trust me, we've all been there.
Yeah, but I feel like recently I've seen a lot of signs and everything, and I feel like those came from God, just from how the situation came about. And so that's why I feel like I'm seeing it more now than I ever have, because I've actually been trying to get to know him. So,
Well, can I tell you something? Because I told you, we're getting near the end. I told you I didn't never like to end on a negative, and we're not stopping just yet. But one of the things that I've also realized in all the research, and maybe I should say this toward the end, but that your generation's the key. You know, someone said, okay, you're killing religion. Well, I think that's really a little bit too. That's obviously exaggerated. You're just coming of birth, if you want to say, both politically, economically, and spiritually. To say you're killing religion, I don't think that's fair. But I do think there's also a lot of evidence that says if we do this right, if we make it genuine, just like you just said, that your generation's also the key to turning this thing around. Because membership in church is dying, not just from your generation, but a lot of a lot of people. Something's gone wrong. Membership's dropped. Everybody knows it. Nobody likes to talk about it sometimes, because then you got to admit things. But so your generation's being pre-blamed for things, but at the same time, you're also being told you're the key to turning it around. And I think I'm on the turn it around side. I'm more optimistic. So let me ask you a couple other kind of conflicting issues, and we got to add that one California flavor at the end. For your generation, the LGBTQI, and I think there's something beyond that, but I don't even know. How do you reconcile that? Because in your generation, all the studies say the majority don't have a problem with it. You think we're a better society for two people that share those values to be able to come together. But then you walk into the church and you have, obviously the issue comes with you. So how do you balance, and I don't even know what your point of view is or if you want to share it, but how would you balance those two? Remember, you're the pastor too. That would be a good one. Put you on the hook.
Okay, if I were the pastor. Well,
Yeah.
I think that is, obviously everyone is entitled to live their life the way they'd like to, and I feel like, they don't necessarily have to be condemned or like just told every single time that they walk into, like, I guess, like an holy area, like you can't be here, like this isn't what it says in the Bible, like you're a disgrace, whatnot. I don't know. I don't think it necessarily has to be like that. I mean, I don't necessarily agree, but I know that everyone's entitled to live their life the way they want to live it, just because that's.
But how do you then reconcile that when you go inside the Bible and you read about, obviously how the Bible views that?
Right.
I mean, how do you stand in the pulpit and give a sermon on it while at the same time recognizing that Generation Z that's sitting out in front of you and overwhelmingly doesn't have that same view as you?
Yeah, that is pretty difficult because.
I mean, do you just stick with the word, or what do you do?
I mean, of course, I wouldn't, if I were the pastor, I wouldn't change the word, but I would probably, let them come to their own conclusions and read it and see how they feel.
So you're not going to stand in the pulpit and bash people. You're going to, you're going to burn. You're going to.
No. I mean, because then at that point, that would just scare them off, and that would turn them away, and then they would never try and seek the Lord. And I feel like that's, of course, not what we all want people to find, the Lord. And
so find some balance. Okay.
Yeah. So I'd probably want them just to keep their own interpretations of the works and pray to God about it and just form their own relationship. I mean, I can't speak for God or what He's going to forgive and what He's not going to forgive.
Sure.
So you never know. I'd rather them make that relationship than not. So.
Okay. One other thing before we close, I wanted to ask you, because obviously my sister lives in Burbank, which is where you came from. And we were talking before we went on the air kind of about agnostics or nuns or whatever, and how a lot of people in your generation say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Okay. And so I think we talked about crystals, things that in California maybe you were exposed to. Could you talk about that just a little bit? Because some of the people around here maybe don't see that kind of thing, just to give you an idea.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like there's a lot of, crystals and manifestation that can happen. That's what I've kind of witnessed in California. It was a lot about energy and like vibrations and yeah, a lot to do with, like listening to a sound and just trying to manifest and be like, okay, I'm going to have a great day, or I'm going to be successful, or I'm going to be rich. And you just keep repeating it in your head over and over. And apparently it's supposed to work. But I've never done this myself, so I'm not really sure.
So it manifests itself by simply repetition?
But yeah, I ran into someone on a flight one time, and they were, going to California, and I was going there. And they're like, hey, like, just so you know, like, I enjoyed the conversation on the plane. I just want to let you know, like, I really, all my success and everything and all the money I've made, it comes from manifesting. And he was like telling me all about these different frequencies and all these things I should try and do and like read, these books. And I was like, oh wow, like that's really interesting. Oh, good for you, dude, if that's how it ended up working out.
And you got all this on an airplane flight, right?
Yeah.
So that's a new South Christian headed toward the South. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I was like, wow. I mean, if it works for him, sure. I honestly don't even know how real it is, or maybe if it's just, if you believe it, you make.
Is that real California though? Isn't that what we call real California?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. Do you, the difference between, I guess, attending church in California as opposed to attending church here, are there a lot of huge differences or that you've noticed? Or
well, I wouldn't say there's really huge differences. I mean, each church does, read the gospel, and it has gospel music playing in the background, and they, they sing, and then, listen to the service, and there's youth groups for younger kids. I wouldn't say there's necessarily too much of a difference. I mean, sometimes maybe the community could be a little bit different based off of how they, do certain things in certain ways.
Cultural, racial makeup.
Right, yeah.
We live in a unique place in Robertson County,
so
trust me.
There's going to be different people from different backgrounds.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Good. All right. So. Now, I promised my buddy I would ask this question. He called me last night and he said, hey, I think you should ask this question and then, turn it back around on him at the end. So this is what it is. He said, and this is kind of personal, but don't take it the wrong way. He said, ask the person, what about me? And I'm being honest, I'm talking about me right now. What about me that you know, either from class or any, because we've obviously run into each other over to Robertson County a little bit as far as that goes. What about me, my personality, qualities, whatever, made you okay with coming on this podcast?
I feel like you were just a really accepting person. I feel like you were really open-minded and yeah, you don't really exactly care what, if people have different opinions. Or like this is what the podcast is all about, really just hearing different opinions and perspectives and not really minding that it's different from yours and just allowing us to have a voice a little bit. I feel like you let us speak a lot. And
so then here's the other half of that point. He said, then turn it around on you and say, what of those qualities, if you were that pastor, if you were going to reach your generation, do you think would get them to come in? You see what I mean? In other words, have I modeled and demonstrated the very characteristics that you just shared with me a little while ago that might be one of the keys to getting people to come in?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, actually, all those probably characteristics I mentioned about you, that's probably what we would be looking for in a pastor, obviously.
Yeah. Well, he gave me that, and I thought, well, that sounds kind of egotistical. What if she says something bad? He goes, I'll just go with it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. No, it wouldn't be bad.
All right. You got any last parting words?
Well, I just want to say, thank you for this time. And I feel like maybe there is a little bit of hope for the future. I don't want to think too negative about, all the pessimistic things like the economy and the environment. Mm-hmm. I just hope that one day we can all set aside our differences and actually come together. Because I feel like the country is divided, obviously, into two parties.
Absolutely.
And that's obviously probably one of the major divisions that separates us and our ideologies. And I feel like our main purpose should be that we're all human and that we all want to, preserve and just to protect ourselves and our environment. And I feel like that should be also most important at the end of the day. So,
well, I'll tell you this before we leave, and I mean this from the heart. We did not meet by accident. I hadn't seen you since last year, and I run into you at Lowe's, And then after that, I think I screwed up and accidentally deleted your phone number to reach out to you to do this. Then the other day, I haven't seen you on campus. And all of a sudden, you walk by at exactly the right time. Those things don't happen by accident. If you want to talk about signs, truly, because I prayed about this podcast. I said, Lord, send people to me. And you were definitely one of them. I definitely thought
People
about it. And when I crossed paths with you
get
twice, I said, it's
There's
meant
a
to be.
train
So I just want to thank Gabby Bass and thank everybody else. And God
Don't
bless
need
you.
no
And have a happy day.
baggage, you just get on board.